So now let me introduce Ms. Ng. Ms. Ng Xiaowei is Principal Psychologist and Head of the Pediatric Psychological Services at the Koh Teck Puat National University Children's Medical Institute, KTP NUCMI, National Universities Hospital. A clinical psychologist by training, Xiaohui has worked with a diverse group of children and adolescents with mental health, learning, and special needs in her almost 20 years of practice. Xiaohui believes in a collaborative approach to psychological practice and actively seeks parental and school partnership in clinical care. Today, her keynote is titled Careless, Lazy, Unmotivated, When What You See Is Not What You Get. Ms. Ng, please.
Hi, okay, thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for having me here. Let me just share my screen. So I'm going to be talking about basically stories from what I see in clinic. I'm a clinical psychologist by training, and I work with children and teenagers, basically primary school age all the way to JC and Polytechnic. And I'm going to be talking to you about what some of the common presentations are for teenagers who have mental health and special need issues present at our practice. So careless, lazy, unmotivated, these are some of the words that I hear either parents or the teenagers themselves tell me, when they come for sessions. But a lot of times when we unpack it, what you see is actually really not what you get. So I like this quote very much. This is from Dr. Ross Green, and he says that kids do well if they can. And if they can't, something is getting in the way, and we need to figure out what it is so that we can help. So Dr. Ross Green is a psychologist by practice as well. And I think just now Serena did mention that, you asking that teachers perhaps ask ourselves that question and reflect on your own personal beliefs as you are teaching. And may I suggest one of this as a belief for your work with all the students that you have, that students generally do want to do well if they can. And in this talk, what I hope to be able to do is to help you to understand what typical middle adolescent developmental stages are, because these are secondary school age students that we're talking about, and the challenges that come with this particular stage of development. I hope to be able to talk to you a little bit about 3 of the common special needs profile that secondary school students have. And these are what we call the invisible special needs, because some of these are actually not really obvious, especially when they're coming from mainstream schools. I hope to be able to help you to understand some underlying skill deficits that these students have and learn how to identify them, as well as maybe provide some simple classroom strategies for you as ideas to support these special needs students. Middle adolescence is defined as the age between 14 to 18. And it is at this age that lots of things happen to teenagers in terms of their development, whether is it physically, cognitively, or emotionally. So in terms of cognitive development, what we see is that teenagers have growing capacity for abstract thinking. This starts actually at an earlier adolescent stage, like maybe you're thinking about upper primary, but it continues to grow. And it grows exponentially at middle adolescence. So what happened is intellectual interest gained a lot of importance. And with that, it actually comes with a lot of anxiety related to school academic performance. These teenagers start to develop a lot of ideas and they have certain ideals that they aspire to. There's a greater capacity for goal setting. Teenagers start to get very interested in moral reasoning and they think about the meaning of life. And I think that's when they question a lot of, why am I doing the things that I'm doing? And also what maybe what is the meaning of my life and why am I here? Why am I learning all these things? Where do I eventually want to go to? What do I want to do next time? So lots of this kind of very abstract thinking. But at the same time, when they are getting interested in all these, the problem is that the capacity for abstract thinking is still growing and developing. So sometimes you see a little bit of a mismatch there. Teenagers at this age, they revert back to a more concrete pattern of thinking when they're under stress. So a concrete pattern of thinking will be a lot more black and white, a lot more kind of like in the here and now, right? So everything is either I see it in this way or it has to be that way. If this is black, it cannot be gray, it cannot be white. Everything is basically what I see is what it is, and this is how I interpret my world. So teenagers, when they're under stress, they actually go back to that easier form of thinking pattern, and it's something to remember. In terms of social emotional development, we see that teenagers have intense self-involvement. Everything is about me, me, me. And when you're looking at me, there must be something special about me. There must be something different about me. There must be something either really good about me or really bad about me, but it's actually all about me. All right. And it alternates between unrealistically high expectations and also worries about failure and poor self-concept. So then what this happens is that we see a lot of teenagers who are very stressed out, very anxious, very self-conscious about who they are. These teenagers often feel misunderstood and are very likely to have extreme mood swings as they alternate between having high expectations for themselves and worries or perceptions about their own failure, and therefore, the poor sense of self. Middle adolescence is also characterized by an increased interest in personal attractiveness and also worries about whether I fit in and whether I am normal. As teenagers grow and develop, there is that continued drive for independence, distancing themselves from parents, that sensing that my parents who have always taught to be role models, or my parents are always right and I always turn to them for advice, that sensing that maybe my parents are not right all the time now. There is that desire to make friends, and there's a lot of reliance and emphasis on the new peer group. Teenagers want to have their friends. It comes with a selection of role models and then feelings of love and passion. So socially, emotionally, these are what teenagers are like. And as we talk about the special needs profile of teenagers in secondary school, I think these are some useful things to keep in mind, that even without special needs, your typical developing teenagers in class, they are actually already going through all these different things that are in their mind, in their emotions. So for teenagers with special needs, I think it comes with a double challenge because they have actually difficulties associated with their condition to deal with as well. So it's just something to keep in mind as we talk about it. I want to bring your attention to some common special needs that we see a lot in clinic here. So one of them is ADHD. So ADHD is a condition where the teenager has difficulties with one or more of the following here. And it has to be to the extent that it affects day-to-day functioning. So children, teenagers with ADHD, we know that they struggle with inattention, hyperactivity, impulsivity, mood regulation, and or organization. And in teenagers, what we notice and what we know is that hyperactivity that we often see in primary school gets replaced to something that is a little bit less obvious. So teenagers tend to be a lot more fidgety, or they describe this inner feeling of jitteriness, restlessness. So when you see that, the teenager with hyperactivity can actually sit in the chair, but they could be fiddling around, or they could be actually looking out and thinking about stuff, but just really, really restless. they are less prone to walking up and down in class as they get older. Females tend to present more with the inattention type issues, so it makes their difficulties harder to notice. And it is actually really important to remember that the teenager is not intentionally being difficult, is not being uncooperative or defiant. And some of these behaviors that we see that we think are them being difficult is actually a situation that arises because of their condition. ADHD is actually a neurological condition. So in numerous brain imaging studies done, this is consistently found that the frontal lobe of the ADHD individual is actually smaller and it develops slower than those without ADHD. So basically the frontal lobe, which is at the front here, it is responsible for a lot of what we call executive functioning behaviors. So it's responsible for problem solving, memory, language, motivation, judgment, delaying gratification, planning, making decisions, paying attention, lots of all these skills that we need for day-to-day stuff in the classroom, when we're doing work, when we're interacting with people, in our day-to-day stuff. So it typically doesn't mature till our early 20s, but for teenagers with ADHD, it could be a lot slower as well. So we are actually dealing with somebody who chronologically could be 14, 15 years old, but in terms of their ability to manage their own behaviors and things like that, because the frontal lobe actually develops slower, they could actually be a couple of years behind. And there is emerging evidence as well that the neural networks, so basically the pathways between the brains where they communicate, the neural networks work differently in the brains of individuals with ADHD as well. And these networks are involved in things like reward, focus, in planning attention, in shifting between tasks, in movement. So again, a lot of all these behaviors, all these skills are needed in classroom learning and in class behavior. Some common mental health issues that are what we call comorbid, meaning that when you have ADHD, there is a higher likelihood that you could have some of these other issues as well. Things like conduct disorder, specific learning disorders. So an example would be dyslexia. Other comorbidities include things like anxiety, depression, as well as tics, which are involuntary movements. So you will actually see that as I talk about autism, as I talk about learning disorders, and I highlight the common comorbidities, mental health issues that come with it, that this same list keeps repeating. So it actually says a lot in terms of the risks that our students with special needs face when it comes to their mental health as well. Again, something to keep in mind. So what I thought I would do is to run through some cases that are seen in clinic. What I hope is that because these cases are actually based on actual patients that are seen in clinic. So if you at some point when you're getting the video recording or after the webinar, if you're discussing things with your colleagues, may I remind you not to discuss them in public. Because they could be somebody that you actually know or work with, or the issues could be very, very similar. So all these teenagers basically presented to NUH Pediatrics with a mental health related condition. And as we work with them, we find that actually a part of it is actually also due to their own personal awareness and also the challenges that came with the special needs that they have. For the purpose of this webinar, I'm actually focusing more on the special education needs and the issues rather than the mental health issues itself. I'm going to introduce you to Kenji, who is a 16-year-old male student in Sec 4 Normal Acad. So I first met Kenji actually in the general ward in the hospital because he presented to our emergency department with suicidal ideation. He is somebody with ADHD, but he's not on medication because he gets really severe headaches when he takes Ritalin. So he has never been on medication. Kenji also has facial tics, and based on that presentation in the emergency room, and subsequently he was admitted for a short while. Our psychiatrist saw him and diagnosed him with depression and started him on medication. So when I first saw him in clinic, he came after school and he had this really, really heavy school bag. And I remember making a comment like, oh no, why you bring such a big bag, after school today? And he said, no, this is my bag every day. Yeah, it's very heavy. I remember making this comment to another teenage girl as well. And she says, oh, you know what? I carry this every single day as well. And I was really fed up with them carrying these heavy bags. And I said, let's go weigh your bag and see how heavy it is. It's 10 kgs. Yeah. So Kenji brings a big heavy bag to school every day as well. He tells me that he daydreams in class. As much as he wants to do well, his results are at best borderline pass in the 50s. He tells his teachers he wants to do well, but he often doesn't hand in his work. He describes himself as lazy. And when he hands in the work, they are usually late and of very poor quality. The handwriting is messy. His essays are very short. They are disjointed. They sometimes are out of point. And he makes what he calls careless mistakes in his math calculations. So perhaps let me deviate a little bit and talk about this whole idea of careless mistakes. Personally, I hate it when my teenagers tell me that, oh, I make careless mistakes, because the term careless mistakes don't actually tell us much information. I mean, what does that mean, right? Does that mean that you went through the work really quickly and then you didn't realize that the class was actually a minus? Did that mean that when you were doing your calculation, you made a transfer error? Was it because as you flip the page over and you don't realize that, oh, I missed out a few sentences here and there as you were copying down your answers? I mean, what does careless mistake mean? So whenever somebody mentioned careless mistake, I think first point would be to really, really find out a little bit more what actually careless means. So this is Kenji, and knowing that he has ADHD and he is 16 years old, I wanted to kind of do an analysis on what exactly is going on with this boy. So if you remember, we talked a bit about adolescent development, and we talked a bit about the skill deficits that comes with having ADHD, and these presenting behaviors that he has in school. You see that he has inattention. He has very poor work skills. His sense of time and time management is very poor. He rushes through his work. And I find out from him why, and he tells me that it's because he worries that he doesn't have enough time. So he ends up rushing through, finishing his work way in advance. He tells me he can finish a 1 hour paper or 1.5 hour paper in 30 minutes. Yeah, so because he's actually really rushing through. And of course, it will have a lot of spelling errors, lots of punctuation. It's of very poor quality. He finds it really difficult to organize his ideas. And because he's rushing through, he's not really thinking about, what's going through his mind as well. And again, because he's rushing through, he cannot write fast enough. So he totally omits all his full stops and commas and things like that because he just wants to get all the ideas out on paper. Kenji also has very poor mental stamina and he cannot work for very long. Why does he have such poor mental stamina? Finding out a lot more, it's because actually we need mental energy to sit down, to pay attention, to organize our work and our ideas. All these things that we cannot take for granted, but for him, he really struggles with it. So other than taking a bit of mental energy to do the composition, he actually already used up a portion of it to actually just sit down. So of course he's going to get tired faster compared to, say, maybe his peers, right? Asked him a little bit about that heavy school bag, and I found out the reason why. Because the school recently implemented an odd week, even week timetable, he doesn't know how to read it. And because he doesn't know how to read it, he's scared of getting scolded. He brings all his books every day. He has very high expectations for himself. He wants to do well, and you can see that it's a very genuine expectation he has of himself. He doesn't want to disappoint his teachers. He doesn't want to disappoint his parents, but he's not able to meet them. And that consistent failure resulted in the poor self-esteem and the depression. So we know that this high expectations of self is part of the developmental stage challenge as well. So something to remember and to help him to address. So I think as teachers, you will have lots of ideas or are already doing a lot of things, that can be very beneficial for Kenji. And just now, Serena also shared a range of resources that are used in her keynote, during her keynote session. So these are just some other basic ideas as a platform to kind of perhaps stimulate a bit of thinking as well, in terms of what we can do to help students like Kenji. So in terms of his work skills, his time management, we started breaking this down a little bit in session to kind of help him to understand that, hey, for each particular section that you do, there is a particular amount of time that you need. And he can tell me, oh yes, my teachers actually went through that with me before, but he doesn't quite know how to apply it. So it's actually making it very concrete for him. Maybe something as simple as, okay, before you start this section, write down what time you need to finish with the earlier section. So then at this time, you should actually be starting on section B already. So things like this. And so these are things that he started to practice when he went back home as well. And sometimes it's helpful to help him to experience how long time is. So if I want to let him know how long 30 minutes is, I make it very intentional. Like, okay, we're starting the session now and we could be talking. At the 30-minute mark, I actually stopped him and I will tell him that, hey, since the time you came in till now, right, that's about 30 minutes. How does it feel? Right? And sometimes time passes very fast. Sometimes time passes very slow because we will be working on something tough. But it helps him to get an internal sense of, okay, this is how long 30 minutes actually feels like. So we talk a bit about improving mental stamina. So assigning work based on what he can tolerate and then scheduling in break times. And then if he can actually only work for 30 minutes, then okay, we work for 30 minutes and then schedule in a 5 or 10 minute break, come back, and then you do for another 30 minutes, take a break, come back. And if you can do 30 minutes, we will actually slowly push it up to 35, 40 minutes by 5-minute increment until the stamina can actually be better. We talked a bit about maybe doing a little bit of exercises for regulation. So if he's sitting down in a chair, if he's sitting in class, what are some things that you can do that's not super obvious, right? So that you can actually get some of that fidgetiness and that restlessness out of your system without disrupting your lessons and without actually disturbing other people as well. And then I think, like, he said that his teachers actually taught him organizing skills as well. So it's actually helping him to put it down specifically, because while he has all these concepts in mind, he actually doesn't really know how to actually go about using them. I talked to his mom about printing out his timetable using different sheets of paper, a blue one for odd week and a yellow one for even week, writing down the dates so that he doesn't get confused, and then he can pack his bag based on the 2 different timetables that he has. We spoke about growth mindset. So, we're actually going to be affirming him for efforts as well, rather than the grades itself. And for mom, she has been actively trying to catch him doing well in terms of making effort and then praising him for that as well. So with Kenji, we work very closely with the school, and his teachers and allied educators are very, very supportive. We spoke about some of these things, and they actually practice that with him when he's in school as well. So in terms of, that's kind of like the structure of the session that I thought like I'll use to speak to you guys about. If you think about it, the questions that we use in terms of trying to identify, hey, you know, when Kenji presented in this way, what are some of the underlying needs? What are the developmental challenges he has? Some of these questions were actually mentioned by Associate Professor Wong in his first keynote. So your SETT questions. So those are relevant and those are very helpful in terms of, you know, I'm trying to understand what are some of the skill deficits and what are some of the developmental challenges that each special needs student actually present with. So I want to briefly touch on autism. We know that it is actually a condition that is characterized by repetitive behavior. Sometimes it could be very peculiar. Individuals with autism have difficulties in communication and social awareness. You may have come across this term called Asperger's syndrome. So that's an old name for high functioning autism. So when it comes to autism, there are varying presentations, and typically teenagers in secondary school would probably have very mild autism symptoms, and then they would have at least average, if not high average, intelligence. So 70% of individuals with autism have one comorbid mental disorder and 40% of them have two. So if you look at it, the list of comorbidities are very similar to the one with ADHD, right? Anxiety, depression, specific learning difficulties as well. ORFID is a new diagnostic criteria to describe individuals who have actually sensorial difficulties with food that's not related to, say, body image and appearance. So I wanted to introduce you to Jamie. She's 15 and in Sec 3 Express. So she's previously been diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. She does well academically and has two good friends in school. She hopes to make more friends, but it actually is a struggle for her. She struggles to fit in, despite the fact that she's very well-read, she's very intellectual, but because of that, she believes that her peers are not as mature and smart as she is. As a result, she gets ostracized. She does have a very strong sense of justice, and she stands up for her peers, and people tease her about it. And currently what Jamie does is she uses helping, right? You know, helping them with homework, doing the bulk of the project work, uses that as a way to make friends. But the moment she stops doing all these things, her friends don't come to her anymore. So that's Jamie, really does well, no problems with the teachers, but really has no friends. So we know that she has poor social awareness. She talks a lot when she's excited, and she doesn't realize that people are in a hurry, or they're not interested, or they're actually trying to respond to her. She has difficulties in communication, always sounds as if she's giving lectures as well. She's not interested in what the peers like, so there's no common topics. Jamie's pretty rigid in her thinking, and she's very concrete when she's stressed. So everything is in black and white, or nothing correct or wrong. Then I want to introduce you to Paul as well. So similar to Jamie, he has high functioning autism. He is highly anxious. He's in Sec 1 Express. He has a high IQ of 130. But despite that, he's consistently underperforming, and this has been always the case since primary school. He gets in Sec 1, he gets B, he gets C, and he gets lots of Fs. He's very frustrated with the school system in Singapore, and he asks his teachers why he has to study these subjects which are very meaningless to him. He tells his teachers that whatever they teach is very narrow-minded. And teachers get really, really upset. Mom comes back and tells me that the teachers are very frustrated because Paul is very rude. And Paul refuses to go to school because it's very meaningless. He's got no friends. He doesn't see a need to go to school and learn all these things because he's not going to use them. But when eventually he goes to school, he ends up being absent for the next 1 to 2 days. So why does he get so tired? Because mentally he's very tired. He needs to sit down, he needs to listen, he needs to try to socialize. So every day that he goes to school, he needs to recuperate. And because he's in school, it's loud, it's noisy, it's hot. People are very near to him and he cannot stand it. So all these things actually play a part in making him really tired. So which is why he cannot find himself going to school after 2 days. He has sensory issues. He cannot wear his uniform for long, and he has nothing to eat in school. Paul is very rigid as well, and he has to have a certain idea. It's very difficult to get him out of that mode of thinking. And because of the way that he tends to overthink as well, everything is very important to him. He cannot really sort out the excessive information. And because of that, everything overwhelms him and contributes to the mental fatigue as well. The highly anxious part of things partly is contributed by his thinking pattern. He focuses a lot on details and he overthinks everything. So again, makes him really anxious, makes him really tired. So some of the common strategies that we can use with Paul and Jamie, if possible, have a think about assigning a group of buddies. So a group rather than one, right? Because it's good to actually expose them to a variety of different peers for work as well as break times. If possible, as teachers, it may be nice to kind of facilitate some casual conversations during downtime. So it gives an idea of it could be about movies, it could be about music, it could be about sports or recently Olympics and things like that, so that it actually gives a platform for them to start talking about stuff. To manage mental fatigue, we want to limit information to essentials. If information is really long and complicated, simplify, give a short portion at a time. Jamie and Paul, we have pretty good rapport, so they know that when they actually go on and on and on and when they're talking, I give them a reminder to stop. Right? So, okay, yeah, all these things that you're thinking about, stop. All right, this is the key point. We deal with this. Whatever they're thinking about next, stop. We're not going to deal with that now. So a possibility in class would be actually to also provide them some time or a space to decompress so that they can actually mentally recover from the fatigue as well. So making meaning is very important for this group. So if possible, connect what is learned to very practical aspects. So for example, doing English summaries, they help us to learn to consolidate information into key points. But sometimes it's just not possible too, right? So we empathize with the adolescent that yes, the work may seem very meaningless to you, but then learning how to tolerate and do things that we don't like is actually a very important life skill. In terms of sustaining school attendance, for Paul, what we did, we worked with the school on reducing his work demands. We started with shorter hours for him to build up that mental stamina so he's not so tired. And with Paul especially, if he's 1 minute late or he's going to be a minute late, he decides he's not going to go, because if I'm going to be punished, I might as well don't go. So we know that he's not intentionally being late, but sometimes the bus is late and things like that. So we worked on maybe, giving him at least like 15, 20 minutes of leeway so that he can be successful in going to school as well. So when it comes to specific learning disorders, I think dyslexia is probably one of the most common. And it affects probably about 1 in 10 teenagers, and teenagers typically have normal intelligence. They come with a lot of general difficulties in the executive functioning type skills that we talked about earlier on, like organizing, planning, in memory. So dyslexia is characterized by, poor word recognition, phonological issues, spelling, reading comprehension. And in earlier days, or when they are younger, maybe letter number reversal. And because of all these difficulties, it does affect their written expression. So I'm gonna maybe give you a few seconds to read this paragraph. It is hard, isn't it? Yeah, because this is how people with dyslexia can experience reading. It took me a while to kind of retype everything out. And I can tell you by the third paragraph, I was exhausted. I wanted to stop typing because it was very tedious. And while I could type out everything, I wasn't reading and comprehending it by the time I wrote to the third paragraph. Yeah. So this is how people with dyslexia struggle when it comes to reading. We think that it's just reading, right? And once I give you the skills you can read, then it's going to be okay. But I'm focusing so much on reading that I cannot comprehend. So an example of somebody with dyslexia, the work that they do. So these are also diagnosed, but they're less common, which you may come across as well, dysgraphia, where there are actually a lot of difficulties with handwriting, with spelling accuracy, in word and letter spacing, as well as dyscalculia, which is a difficulty in processing mathematical information, in learning math, in knowing math facts, and math reasoning. So dysgraphia can look like really, really bad handwriting and spelling. And again, it co-occur with the usual stuff, right, that we see in the earlier slides. Benjamin is 16 years old. He is in a Sec 4 Express. He has dyslexia. He is highly anxious. He gets recurring headaches. Now, most of the school teachers do not know about his condition. He does really, really well in terms of not bringing attention to his dyslexia. Ben is usually on top of his schoolwork, and he does well for most of his subjects, except for the languages and math. He's always tired, he's always stressed, and he has a headache almost every day. Yeah. When he was in Sec 3, he decided that he would take a more manageable subject combi, even though he does really well. The teachers who didn't know about his condition were actually quite baffled. Like, hey, why did you not go to the so-called best class in that sense? So if you think about the paragraph that you tried to read just now, that's actually the challenges that Ben has on a day-to-day basis, right? So it takes him longer than usual to read and understand, and therefore longer time to finish his work. He hardly gets any rest in between the term time, and he gets really, really mentally tired. Ben has high expectations for himself as well. He wants to get all A's, and he worries very much about failure. But the nice thing about it is that he can be very practical, and he decided at Sec 3 that I'm going to take on a more manageable subject combi so that I can actually focus on quality. So, we talk a bit about managing the mental fatigue and actually hopefully to also address some of his anxiety. So providing him with breaks, giving him reading comprehension skill strategies. Sometimes we may talk to teachers about maybe considering reducing demands for routine practice work. So again, the whole idea of quality versus quantity. And if possible and appropriate, to allow a little bit more time to turn in assignments. So we have working memory ideas as well. So how to actually help him to consolidate and remember things. So I wanted to briefly share with you a success story. This is Elijah. So he is actually 14 years old. He's in Sec 2 and 8. He has a very unique medical condition that requires frequent toilet visits. I started seeing him actually in P4, and he has ADHD, he has dysgraphia. They are both pretty severe. And because of all these difficulties with the medical condition and the learning-related special needs, he had severe anxiety attacks and emotional dysregulation. He refuses to go to school. He is fearful of writing. When I had to assess him so that he could get assessed accommodations for PSLE, he broke down, he cried, he refused to write. I had to arrange 2 separate sessions to get him to write 1 paragraph. He gets intense panic attacks and crying episodes, and that's him in primary school. And this is despite a lot of support that the school teachers and the parents are giving him. But now what happens is he's in Sec 2, and he is confident, he's adjusted very well. He's rightly placed in NA. He can learn at his own pace, but he's still very challenged. He has support and access arrangements, which takes a lot of stress away from him. So what actually really helped when I spoke to mom about this is that I think he has teachers who see him as an individual rather than someone with a set of problems. They give him space to develop his strengths. So taking away, his difficulties with learning, he has a great sense of humor. He's really good at public speaking, and he's really interested and good in IT stuff. So in Sec 1, as he transits to Sec 2, these are things that the school actually intentionally did for him as well. They made sure that he has at least 1 familiar teacher from the previous year. He has some buddies from his previous same class with him. He's given a seat next to the door so that he can actually quietly leave to go to the bathroom when he needs to. And then he's exempted from mother tongue. And, just now, Prof. Wong mentioned about the different kind of technology used in terms of helping our kids to be successful. So for Elijah, he actually has been allowed to type rather than write, and that takes a lot of fear away from him. He has extra time, and he has access to an individual room for all his tests and exams. And all this would have only been possible if the family, the student, and especially the teachers work together very well together to actually support the child. So I want you to remember that students do well if they can, right? And if you don't remember anything about this presentation after today, I hope that you can actually just take these 3 points to get away with you, that students do well if they can. And if they cannot, always consider what are the adolescent developmental challenges that they have and where are the skill deficits that they have. I'm going to leave you with this quote. And with that, thank you very much for your attention.